Hey everyone, welcome to another Teach You Tuesdays with Midtown Houston and Bagby Park. I'm today's host. My name is Brittany Bly. I'm the founder of Pop Shop America. You can visit us online at popshopamerica.com. I teach all kinds of cool crafts and art workshops. We also have all kinds of craft kits full of different supplies so that you can craft at home at your own pace. So today we're going to talk about watercolor. We're going to go through all the basics. I'm going to show you some brushes. I'm going to show you some brush techniques. And then I'm going to show you this really cool technique that you don't need a lot of experience for, and it makes really beautiful art. It's called a wax resist. So let me show you that right now. So here we've got our wax resist. So we're going to do one of these at the end. We're also going to do some different watercolor brush techniques, and that's actually the best way to start. Anytime we start with watercolor, we want to start at the very beginning, so we want to start with all of the basics. So we are going to start with, we've got our watercolor right here. We've got some white crayons. These are specific for our wax resist, so we're going to do later. If you are new to watercolor and you're thinking about getting a beginner set, I really recommend this brand. This is available at popshopamerica.com. You can find it other places too. It's really affordable. It's a really great student brand. You'll notice that what I'm using and this right here is liquid watercolor, which I prefer to dry watercolor. Dry watercolor, you will have to add water to activate it. With these, you do as well, but it's already in a liquid form, so it's just a lot less work. It's less rough on your brushes. The type of brushes that you need for watercolor have these beautiful kind of rounded tips. I have a few different sizes. If you take a look, there's a few different brush sizes. I've got a number 6, a number 10, and this is actually a number 12. There are different sizes too, bigger or smaller, and you'll know them by their numbers. And that is a really great way to just kind of control how much you're working with at the same time. So all of these right here, all of the things we're talking about are actually available in a kit together at popshopamerica.com, so if you just want all of the supplies at once. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our brush basics. Here we go. So we want to have some dark colors and we want to have some light colors. And I want you to see how little I'm actually dropping into this palette. It is less than a dime's worth. It's a very tiny amount. So far, I've grabbed some purple. I'm going to grab some yellow. I'm leaving spaces in between all of the places where I'm dropping the watercolor. So if you take a look at my painter's palette, let's go ahead and move all these crayons out of the way. If you take a look, I'm leaving a space in between all of the colors that I'm dropping, and that's just so as I'm working, I can kind of blend them a little bit if I'm so inclined. Again, I'm just using a very tiny amount. It's less than a dime's worth. This set of watercolor that I have right here, I've had this for 2 years, 3 years. And if you take a look at this tube, for example, I've barely used any. So it's really remarkable how long these will last if you take good care of them, and you really only need a tiny amount. Here we go. We've got some water. And we can just hold our brushes right on in that water, and we're going to move our color chart that I've started. This is for all these different brush techniques that I've talked about. So right here, I have them written down what we're actually doing. We're going to do a graded wash, something called a color dropping, 2 different types. Then we're going to blend different colors together. We are going to do some wet brush techniques, 2 different kinds of that as well. We're going to do some controlled blending. This is a really cool feature of watercolor. And then I'm just going to show you some fun, like, splattery techniques. So we've got this right here. These are the different examples of what we're doing. And I'll have this that I can show you later. You can see me work, and then we'll do some overheads as well so you can see it up close. So I'm going to work with my smaller brush. I've got my 6. Anytime I take it out of the water, I'm kind of removing most of the excess water off of the brush. Actually, you know what? For blending these watercolors, I'm actually going to use a bigger brush just so I can add more water at a time. So if you take a look, I've used less than a dime size amount for every color, and I'm adding double the amount of paint and water, maybe even more. After I add all of that water, I'm not even going to blend all of the paint into the water. So I'm actually using way more water than I am paint. Every time I use any of these colors, it's mostly water with just a little bit of the paint. And remember that I'm using a liquid watercolor, which is very different than using a dry watercolor, in which case you're going to be using an even larger amount of water and less amount of that color pigment, that dry color pigment. So I've got this beautiful purple right here, and we're doing a graded wash. A graded wash is really cool. So what we do is we start at the top. We're going to work in blocks. Each one of these is going to become color blocks. So we're going to start at the top with a small amount of color, and we're just going to do our brush back and forth, back and forth. We're making brush strokes at the top with one of our colors. I'm using purple, but you can use any color you like, back and forth. Now add it in the water, get all of your pigment out of your brush, and then where you left off with the color pigment, just do that wet brush down your page. And what you'll see is that as you work downwards, your color is going to become lighter and lighter. Again, we will do some overhead shots later, but if you take a look, we start out dark down here, and now we've created a gradient, which is a graded wash, and it's by using partial pigment, then adding water, and using water to spread the pigment down and actually mute the pigment as you're working down. So next, we're going to do some color dropping. This is really fun. So the two different types of color dropping, we're going to start with a layer of dark, and then we're going to add a light color to it. Then we're going to do it in reverse. We're going to start with a light color, and then we're going to add a dark to it, okay? So let's start with the dark one. Let's use a different color. So I've got this blue over here. The colors that I'm using, by the way, are like a true purple, like a violet, a dark, almost a navy blue. I've got a kind of a forest or like a green apple green. I've got a true yellow or maybe even like a lemon yellow, and I've got white. You can use any colors you like. I just grabbed a few, and I wanted to grab some light and some dark. That way I could show you some of these different techniques and how these colors blend together. So now we've got the blue, and we're going to make a big square of blue. And so notice if my color is a little bit too dark or it's darker than what I like, I can just drop my brush right into the water and lighten the color and move it around. I want, for this color dropping, I want my square right here to be very wet. So if you notice, I'm adding a lot of water to this watercolor, and I'm making it really, really wet. Now I'm going to remove all of the pigment, everything I can, and now I'm going to take a very small amount of this yellow, and I want this yellow to be nice and thick and dark, so I'm not adding a ton of water, and now I'm just going to do little drops right on top of that blue. And so what you can do with this color dropping technique is you can actually see the way that you can layer colors on top of each other. So let's just take a quick look. Now we've got this beautiful blue background with these drops of yellow on top, and you can see the way that they spread out. Now let's do that in reverse. So let's use the same colors, that way we can really see the difference. Now we want our yellow to be nice and light, and then we want our blue to be kind of dark on top of that, right? So first you saw what a darker color background and then a lighter color on top is going to look like. So now we're just doing that in reverse. So let's make a nice light yellow, and I can even use the big brush for this. And remember, we want this to be nice and wet. Nice and wet. And maybe there was even some brown in this brush, or maybe in this palette that I didn't quite get out, so you will notice some little tinges of brown, but don't be alarmed. That's specific to me and the tools that I'm working with. And let's grab a smaller brush, and let's add a tiny amount of those blue, and take a look at that. So you can really see the way that that color is spreading. And it creates such a gorgeous spread of paint. It doesn't stay perfectly even because the background was wet, and then we're applying wet paint on top of that. So it's not going to be perfect circles. It's going to spread because that paper underneath is wet. I'll show you that a little bit more in depth later so you can understand that concept a little bit more thoroughly. But for now, let's actually blend some colors. So we haven't worked with the green yet. So let's do a little bit of green. Again, I'm just adding lots of water to it. And so with color blending, this is the first time we're going to use two different colors and create a gradient. It's a lot like the graded wash, but it's going to use two different colors instead of water and one color. So we want this to be nice and wet, so we're going to add more water as we go. We've got our green, and let's grab a different brush. This one looks like it still has some blue in there, and that's the perfect one to blend with this green. And let's just kind of go in reverse and let them meet in the middle. And we've already created a really gorgeous, almost like a seafoam green by blending these two together. All right, now we've blended colors together. We're really starting to build on some of these different watercolor techniques. Now let's do something that's really fun where you can see that color dropping in action. What we're going to do is a wet brush technique. The first one I'm going to do, I'm going to get this paper wet so I don't have any color on my brush. And what I want to do is I just want the paper to be wet, but I don't want there to be any water bubbling at the surface. The paper is wet, but there's not water droplets on the surface of the paper. So this is going to take a minute, right? Because we actually, to do this, we want the water to be able to soak into the paper. And just to give you guys the big picture, so I know we're talking about these different brush techniques, so hopefully you guys have gotten this far and you're really into it, but in case you're like, wait, why am I doing these? These are the foundations of how to move the paint, how watercolor actually works. So once you know all of these different brush techniques, the idea is that you can build upon them and really create images and beautiful things that you love, and that you can understand how to work with the medium. But again, it's something you definitely, to do these brush techniques, it's very beginner friendly, and it's something you want to learn as a foundation to watercolor, but it might not be the most exciting thing about watercolor, so do stick to the end because we are going to do a really cool wax resist that I absolutely love. So you guys hopefully are noticing that this one is, the paper is really starting to soak in as wet. And with this one, I'm actually like tapping water because I'm trying to get water onto the surface. And we're going to do both of these wet brush techniques at the same time. And you can see the difference based on the way that the water is pooling on the surface of the paper. This one, it's soaked into the paper. This one, it's bubbling on the surface. So with this one, I can actually use my hand. You could use a paper towel to just dry the surface even a little bit more. So lean down so that you can see the angle of the light and know how wet or dry the paper is. And I'm actually just drying the surface a little bit more. And then let's take this purple or any color you like, just a very small amount. And now we're just going to do little drops. Just like our color dropping technique before, we're just doing little drops of color on our wet paper background. Okay, and this one's nice and pooled up, which is perfect. This one was nice and dry. So already I can see how much more the paint is spreading when the water is pooled on the paper on the surface. So take a look. On this one, we've got tiny little droplets. They remain pretty stationary. Here, our purple, we can actually move it just by angling where that water is flowing because there's water pooling on the surface. So now let's move on to one of my favorites, controlled blending. So once you start blending your colors, you're doing some color blending, there's lots of different ways that you can blend those colors. One of my favorites, you can see how it works by just creating stripes of color in one direction. It can be any color. I'm choosing a yellow, something light, and now I'm going to do something that's dark. And yellow and blue are complementary colors, so let's do that. And now I'm going to do stripes in the other direction. I love this. Okay, can't wait for you to see this. So with this one, you'll see that we've got dry paper and wet paint. As you pull the blue through the yellow stripes, it hits that wet paint, that wet watercolor, and it begins to spread, but only along the lines where the paint is because that's the part that's wet. It doesn't affect these dry areas. That's just one of my favorite things. There's so much you can do with that, but working with some cross-hatching, some stripes is a great way to start. Last thing is super fun and super silly. Everybody loves a good splatter paint. So for this, you can use any size brush, big or small, put some pigment on it, hold it in one hand, and just flick it with the other. And this seems like a really simple technique, but it makes for really, really beautiful accents in any of your watercolor pieces. All right, so now that we've learned those brush techniques, let me show you wax resist because they're absolutely beautiful. We'll just set this to the side and let it dry. Let's get another piece of watercolor paper. And I don't think we need any additional colors. We've got some blue and some purple, and I think that'll work really well for this. So let me just really quickly show you this watercolor wax resist again. Here's one that I made before. This is actually the very same one you can see on our blog. So if you go to popshopamerica.com, you type in wax resist, you'll find a tutorial about how to do this, and you'll see this exact painting that I made. And for this, we need crayons, and we also need a stencil. So here are some different stencils that I have. I have this B for my name. I'm not going to use that, just not in the mood. These work really great. Shapes like this work really great as accents, as backgrounds. You can actually use them along the edge just to create some kind of movement and texture. These are really, really cool, but I'm not going to use that either. This one I think is really beautiful, but hopefully you can see how fine all of the lines are. This is going to be really difficult for a wax resist, so this is one that although I like it, I'm not going to use it. This one is better because the lines are nice and thick and bold. I'm going to instead use this one. It's small and it's simple, so it's a really great example. This one is a moon and stars. And one of the most important things when we're doing a watercolor painting like this is we really want to think about composition. So we're not going to put our moon and our stars in the very center. We're going to probably put it off to the side. In this case, I'm going to put it in the lower left. And I'm also kind of angling this to sort of an angle that creates like a push-pull with the composition. So the first thing we do with a wax resist is we lay down the wax. This white crayon is invisible. You can also use just regular wax. You can even use something like candle wax if you like, or a wax crayon, or like a wax stick that looks like a crayon basically. But these white Crayola crayons are definitely the most affordable and the easiest to find. So I think that this is a really good thing to start with when doing a wax resist. So I want to make sure that I really firmly hold this in place, and I definitely want to start with my edges. Whenever you are stenciling, if you start with your edges, it's going to create a really clean, crisp border to whatever you're stenciling, and it's going to make it look really professional and really, really good. So I'm noticing that there's like a little bit, maybe you guys saw on the stencil that there was like a little bit of color like still left on the stencil from somebody using it previously. We probably should have started with like a perfectly clean stencil. So I am accidentally pulling a little bit of that pigment into this wax. So you're going to see a tiny bit of color, but that's literally just from the way that I'm working with it. That's not something that you'll see if you're working with a clean stencil. And even with these stars are pretty small. I'm not sure how easily I'm going to get clear, crisp edges. They do seem just like a little bit small. A wax resist, you definitely want any of the stencils to be nice, wide lines. Anything that's really tiny and small is just a little bit too big for your crayon, and so that makes it a bit of a challenge. So let's see, let's pull this stencil up, and we're going to kind of shake off any of that wax that's still on there. I feel like I missed a couple spots on my moon, but I can kind of see it just from the amount of pigment that pulled through. So I'm just going to do the interior just a little bit. So I'm not really altering the edges, but I am altering the interior. Yeah, and I feel like actually these little corners were hard to get. So make sure when you're doing this that any of your small pieces, your corners, that you really lay down a lot of wax. That's what's going to make the image look nice and professional. So I'm just adding a little bit more on the edges. And now we are ready to add some color. So it doesn't matter what brush you use. You can use the big or the small. But basically, we're just going to lay down some color around where you had that wax. And we definitely want to use more than one color. We don't want to just use one. That way we can create a nice layered effect in the paint. Yeah, and this is already looking very lovely. Also, watch the way that you're moving the brush, because your edges will show up. So like, did you notice that I was doing my brush back and forth? So it was sort of creating stripes, which is not exactly what I was going for. So now I'm moving the brush in circles, and it's definitely giving it a better effect. So just watch your brush strokes and the angle of them so that you're moving the paint in a way that looks aesthetically pleasing to you. So we definitely want this to be a little bit more interesting of a shape. So like right now it's almost like a kind of a square, and that's where our splatter technique is going to come in. It seems like it's not even that big of a deal, but for something like this, if we just add a few little splatters, now I've created a shape that's really unique. So let's just take a look at this beautiful wax resist. We have a moon and stars on top of a beautiful white background. You could, of course, cut this out if you wanted it to be smaller. You could add more wax resist things through here. You could work with stencils that are a little bit larger that maybe fit your paper a little bit better, but this is what we have come up with. Now we have our different brush techniques. We have our wax resist. If you want to learn more of these tutorials or you want to go in depth, make sure you visit Pop Shop America. In the search, you can put in watercolor, and you can find all of these different tutorials and more. And I am Brittany Bly. This has been lovely to be with you and make sure you come back for another Teach You Tuesdays with Midtown Houston.